Okay, so in this video, I'm going to explain a little bit what I meant by the question of the term Renaissance being controversial or discussed by modern historians. Yeah, so the term was coined by two historians in the 19th century by the name of Michelet and Burckhardt. And what these two men saw and built their coining of the term on was the idea that during the period that they called the Renaissance, the European society had sort of stopped or finished the backwards thinking of the Middle Ages and had recovered part of what they saw as the luminous, glorious past of ancient Greece and Rome. And 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 so they said that Europe was being reborn, and that's why the term Renaissance was born. But as we studied in past classes, actually medieval Europe had been evolving and changing from a long time before the beginning of the Renaissance. Yes, what they called the Renaissance was a movement that started mostly in Italy in the 15th century, in the 1400s, and lasts about 200 years. And then this period of the series of changes actually sort of expanded throughout Europe in different moments. So what we see actually is that they looked at sort of the final products of those changes that we started seeing from the 12th century at least. Yes, the changes in the social structure, the appearance of the bourgeoisie, the importance of trade and bankers, the changes in architecture from the Romanesque to the Gothic. All these actually changes and phenomena prove the fact that actually the Middle Ages were not as backwards as Michelet and Burckhardt suggested. And in the case, for example, of trade was actually quite extensively done way before the Renaissance. Another aspect that modern historians criticize in the view of these two men is the fact that when we look at ancient Rome or Greece, a lot of the building and a lot of the important work was done by slaves, and then in medieval Europe there was no slavery. So this is another sort of point in favor of looking at medieval England as more advanced than their previous ages of Greece and Rome. The other question is that actually during the Middle Ages there was actually a series of changes in science, in bringing back from the East in the Crusades of knowledge. So all these actually then eventually did sort of filter down to the mentality or the changes in paradigm that we see in the Renaissance. But this is not something that happened overnight. Yes, this is actually the result of a slow process that was in the making for many, many centuries, at least three, so many years, a couple of centuries before the Renaissance kind of appeared. And the other thing that we need to remember is that all those glorious discoveries, scientific changes, philosophical changes, political changes, all that actually was experienced by a tiny minority. Yes, this was an urban phenomenon that was experienced mostly by the elites. But most of the people in Europe had no idea that a Renaissance was going on. They continued living in exactly the same way they had been living before. Feudal ties were still very much active and legal. And so what we see in terms of the arts and the changes in architecture and the political thought and, I don't know, the telescope and Galileo and finding the movement of the planets, that was something that was known by a tiny, tiny minority. and most of the people in Europe were still living exactly in the same way as they had been living in the previous century or a couple of centuries.